Hi, and thanks for joining us on our special talk show edition of CNA Correspondent. I'm Chandni Vatwani in Jakarta. This week, we discuss something that's become increasingly apparent in recent years: climate change.
This village in central Java was once situated about 2.5 kilometers from the Java Sea. Today, it's surrounded by seawater, and not just the living are affected, but the dead too.
Itu dulunya air pasang sampai tinggi apapun itu tidak pernah tanah itu tenggelam. Tapi mulai tahun 2007 sampai sekarang tiap hari tenggelam, Pak.
Timbu Sloko village could be a harbinger of things to come for the world's largest archipelagic state. Extending over 5,100 kilometers from east to west, Indonesia is already no stranger to extreme climate events like floods and droughts. And scientists say a changing climate could have devastating effects, particularly on Indonesia's coastal settlements. The country's National Research and Innovation Agency has projected that at least 115 of Indonesia's islands will be underwater by the year 2100.
Joining me today are Rahmat Kaimuddin, Deputy Coordinating Minister of Maritime Affairs and Investments in Infrastructure and Transportation, and one of the key figures in the country when it comes to the energy transition policy. And we also have Tiza Mafira, Director of Climate Policy Initiative Indonesia, a climate think tank. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
As we've just seen, Indonesia is at high risk of being affected by climate change. But from a government standpoint, what are your top concerns?
Part of the government job is actually very key government jobs is basically two things. One is to protect the people and also to create prosperity for the people. So I think what we want to work on is to make sure that Indonesian economy, Indonesian people can continue growing to reach prosperity, but also to protect the people from the key impacts of the climate change.
Now, Tiza, would you agree with what Pak Rahmat said, or do you think that there should be specific areas of focus that perhaps need more attention compared to others?
Well, disaster resilience is one of those key focus areas. So I think that resilience goes hand in hand with economic strength. And so policy should be crafted in a really focused and targeted way to address that resilience.
Indonesia is, of course, the largest economy in Southeast Asia, and at the same time, it is one of the world's largest emitters of greenhouse gases as well. Now, of course, economic growth, climate action, both equally vital for the nation's future. But what are some of the challenges, would you say, faced by the government in achieving this delicate balance?
In the end of the day, that's the holy grail, right? To decouple the economic activity and the emission. So for us, basically, when you talk about economic growth, economic activities, what is clear is that you'll need energy to do it. Now, the energy you can generate from multiple sources. It can be from fossil today, also from renewables. The existing, what we call initial conditions, and as well as the constraints, right? Indonesian initial conditions today is that we are a developing country. So Indonesia built quite significant amount of coal-fired power plants, and that is kind of the legacy problem that we have today. And of course, if you want to shift that into more, greener, then you need to make sure that you do it right, because otherwise, let's say you want to power yourself with wind and solar, for example. What happens when the wind doesn't blow, when the sun doesn't shine? I also have to say that it's slightly different from the kind of challenges that is faced by people in the developed nations. The G7 countries that probably faced this issue 100 years ago, 50 years ago, right? The issue is about, for example, replacing, turning off. For us, it's about how can we build more infrastructure, and how can we turn off this otherwise economically productive asset. Those are the kind of challenges that we face.
Given these rather different challenges for Indonesia, what are some of the key things that authorities are focusing on to sort of overcome these challenges?
We need to make sure that more and more new power plants that we build is renewable. We need to add more friction, for example, on the building of fossil fuel, which I think we have introduced.
I think it absolutely is a complex issue. There's not just one single approach, right? I don't think it's characterized as striking a balance between two equal weights of economic growth and climate change mitigation. If we don't tackle the climate crisis, we won't have economic growth, and we'll have to deal with huge costs and losses and disaster risk in the future if we don't tackle this now. So it's viewed as a necessity, as an urgency. And like all necessities, the challenge in meeting those necessities is the lack of resources, the lack of financing. We need financing to upgrade the grid. The priority should be in making sure that we attract the kind of private financing that's needed, but also public financing, because we're not just trying to build enterprises here, right? We're trying to build public facilities, infrastructure. We're trying to build high-skilled human resources, and we're also trying to build community resilience, which is all, very weighty necessities.
So given the depth of the, all the things that we require, and given the complexity of the issue, do you then think that developed countries should do more to help developing nations to combat climate change?
Absolutely. I think the developed countries need to do two things, actually. First of all, they need to be more ambitious with their own climate goals, because we still see today developed countries investing in fossil fuels. But secondly, they should also be supporting developing countries. And the reason why is because developing countries, we're not trying to follow the same trajectory of development that developed countries went through. We're trying to leapfrog here. We're trying to leapfrog several stages of development into a fully decarbonized economy.
Clearly a very complex issue with no easy solutions. Next up, we will discuss why climate action by Indonesia is also crucial for the Southeast Asian region. We're in the midst of the rainy season in many parts of Southeast Asia, but this part of the world is also no stranger to another phenomenon that's made worse by bad weather: the haze.
In 2019, a transnational air pollution crisis affected several countries in Southeast Asia for several months. From Brunei to Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore and Malaysia, the air quality reached unhealthy levels, and cities choked in a dense haze for weeks.
I get headaches. There was one point I got really bad sore throat as well.
This after large-scale forest fires spread across Indonesia. They were allegedly caused by farmers using slash-and-burn techniques to clear land. But this wasn't the first or last time that transboundary haze was recorded in Southeast Asia. In 1997, ASEAN faced one of its most severe cases of transboundary haze, with the economic, social and environmental damage estimated at around $9 billion. And a 2016 study estimated that the 2015 Southeast Asian haze may have caused around 100,000 deaths, mostly in Indonesia. Though all 10 ASEAN countries have signed a legally binding measure against transboundary haze, the problem spiked again in 2023, affecting Indonesia, Malaysia and Singapore.
Now, we've had relatively good air quality over the last few years due to, of course, wetter conditions of La Nina. But in 2023, countries like Singapore and Malaysia were once again hit by transboundary haze. This year, climate scientists are predicting hotter, much drier due to El Nino. But while climate change could make the haze worse, do you think more should be done to break this vicious cycle? After all, much of the haze in southern regions of Southeast Asia is emitted from peatland fires. What are your thoughts?
Maybe 5 to 10 years ago, Indonesia has dealt with very serious forest fires and occurrences of forest fires in the past, and has made a lot of progress in reducing deforestation and dealing with those forest fires. Now we're seeing forest fires and haze and air pollution from various sources, not just in Indonesia, but in all countries that experience drought and extreme weather conditions. So I think that no matter what the policies for reduced deforestation are, we're still going to experience some of this air pollution. So I think the key is, again, tackling it from all angles, tackling it as a matter of air pollution, tackling it as a matter of preventing deforestation, and tackling it as a matter of decarbonizing emissions from industries and power plants.
Now, we've seen transboundary haze from peatland fires affecting neighboring countries, so it becomes then an ASEAN issue, which can sometimes escalate or even threaten to affect bilateral ties. But how can we persuade communities or corporations that it is in their best interests to protect peatlands?
I think in general, this haze issue is a big issue, and I think in Indonesian government, through the Ministry of Forestry and Environment, has created some regulation. And as Tisa mentioned, the deforestation has become lower and lower in the future. So I think what we need to do is to continue educating the people as well as the companies to eliminate this type of practice.
Awareness is certainly an important factor, but do ordinary Indonesians care about climate change?
Jadi sekarang pokoknya lebih panas deh dari 10 tahun lalu atau 100 tahun lalu gitu.
Artinya ada perubahan temperatur yang ekstrim, artinya pattern cuacanya jadi kacau ya.
Perubahan suhu, curah hujan, pola angin, dan lain sebagainya.
Now, as we saw there, a common climate change association by Indonesians is rising temperature. Now, hotter temperatures, lack of rainfall, more sun, low wind speeds are all factors that increase air pollution, especially in Jakarta during drier months. Like the rest of the country, I too, last year woke up one day and saw that Jakarta has been named the world's most polluted city on earth. But since winning this title in the second half of last year to now, what have authorities done to improve the situation in Jakarta that has worked? And I believe, but you also have been attributed as saying that the main solution is in limiting the emissions during combustion. So what has worked?
The key things that we have to address will be transportation, right? In Jakarta, maybe there's about 20 million tailpipes. It's like, 17 million motorbike, 3 million cars. We need to make sure that the tailpipes is relatively off to good standard. So we do have some emission standard, and that is something that we need to make sure that people comply. So we have people to check, and if they don't, we penalize it. Beyond improving the emission standard from the industry, from the tailpipes, we also are currently looking into what we can do to eliminate the emission from transportation altogether, right? Through pushing for electrification.
When we're talking about the solution of transportation being electric vehicles, I also think we need to be very clear on what EVs is meant to be solving and what it's not meant to be solving, right? Because some people are saying EVs doesn't solve for traffic. Well, of course it doesn't solve for traffic. Nobody was saying that it would be solving for traffic. But what it does is that it creates a potential for vehicles to be powered by a source of energy that's not fossil fuel. It can be powered by renewables. And I think that's a very important space to open up.
Based on your perception, do you think these policies are being implemented correctly?
There will be different challenges in how fast we can accelerate the changes in these industries. I think that's just the reality. So I would like to see more, rapid transformation in the electricity industry, but I also understand how challenging that is, given that it's an essential service for the people.
And just really quickly, based on your experience or what you are seeing, what would be a factor besides price that could shift people's perception and make them, point them towards buying or picking an electric vehicle as opposed to what they usually would buy?
I think a lot of the attraction towards these technologies is the cost efficiency in the long run. Saying goodbye to gas stations forever is very attractive if you can get around the first cost of capital, right? I would also like to see a similar level of ease and affordability for rooftop solar panel, for example. It's not just limited to EVs, and there's a lot that the consumer can do to shift its consumption of energy at home and on the roads. So I think the government does need to be more ambitious on all fronts and making sure that all kinds of green technology can be affordable.
Lots of work to be done. Coming up next, we'll take a closer look at some of Indonesia's green goals. You're watching CNA Correspondent. The Indonesian government has set its sights on achieving net zero emissions by 2060, with an interim target of reaching net zero emissions in forestry and other land use by 2030. But is it on track to meet its targets?
Nearly half of Indonesia's electricity comes from coal. In November, the country announced its aim to boost the share of renewables in its power generation from 13% at present to 44% by 2030, with plans to deploy more solar farms and wind turbines to generate electricity and eventually reduce the use of coal to zero by 2050. Experts say the challenges in meeting these climate goals are funding and the willpower to drive energy transition. This puts its presidential candidates in the spotlight as Indonesia elects its next president this year.
Indonesia has some ambitious goals, green goals, yet faces challenges on the ground in implementation and execution of its plans. Do you think all of these goals are achievable?
I think we have to try to achieve them because this is a very important agenda. Of course, there's a lot of challenges, and I think Indonesia today is always very open to share this problem and also asking for support, because this is a global agenda as well.
It's no secret that coal still powers much of Indonesia. Now, can the country wean itself off coal, you think?
The country has certainly planned to wean itself off coal. We've seen the long-term strategies, we've seen the net zero plans, and it does show a significant reduction of coal-fired power plants and coal and fossil fuels in general in the energy mix. Can it? Well, it will depend, as I said earlier, on whether we have enough capacity and resources and financing to do that. I think we can, but the problem is that we have a deadline, right? We're trying to do it in an accelerated manner. We can do it, but can we do it fast enough, is the question.
We keep saying over and over again to our partners that Indonesia is not, we want to do this. But we also have to remember that Indonesia is still a developing country, less than $5,000 GDP, still growing economy, with this kind of geography, with this kind of investment that needs to be made. Some of this investment today, we cannot afford to destroy, if you will. Not all of these things we can afford to. So I guess the question is that we can walk at our own pace.
I'd like to ask, what do you think can be used to power up the country instead of coal then?
Renewables. Absolutely, the answer is renewables. And a mix of renewables, not just one source of renewables. Indonesia, can we go fast enough? Well, certainly geopolitically, we're not a blocker. We have said yes to language that we'll wean ourselves off coal. We have said yes to language and even implemented in our regulations language that says early retirement of coal plants. So I think for all intents and purposes, Indonesia has good intentions and has made good on planning for those intentions. I think acceleration can absolutely happen if we manage to create a transmission grid that connects these different regions and is able to distribute power evenly, powered by renewables. I think that's a great opportunity and something that we're still struggling to find financing for at the moment, including from developed countries.
Given that we have the upcoming presidential elections, What are your hopes for Indonesia's next president in terms of climate action and environmental awareness?
I think climate is not a controversial issue in this election. I think everybody agrees, and maybe our task as an ongoing administration is to work as hard as we can to provide all the foundations needed to build the momentum to make sure that we are continuing in this path to fulfill our commitment to the world and also for the benefit of our people.
I think it is worth pointing out that all presidential candidates have a climate goal, which shows how this issue is not a polarizing issue. We're not a country of climate deniers. There was research maybe a couple of years ago that showed that we're a country of climate deniers. I actually disagree with that. And I think that what remains to be seen is the different policy approaches and the detailed policy approaches in reaching those climate goals. And I think that's a really healthy debate to have. So what I'd like to see from the incoming new president is the ability to collaborate on these issues, and also a clear vision that renewables is seen as an opportunity and that fossil fuels are seen as a risk.
Tiza, Pak Rahmat, thank you so much for coming to the show. Lots to ponder in the years ahead, not just here in Indonesia, but also where you are, as the effects of climate change becomes more apparent around the world. I'm Chandni Vatwani. Thanks for your company.